This video was brought to you by Nebula. Now, anyone from the UK will know just how strange and expensive our rail transport is. Getting from one major city to another can often cost more than a plane ticket to another country, and it's not as though the experience is value for money. Trains are often overcrowded, late, or downright cancelled. Now, the previous Conservative government knew this, and in an attempt to address it, the then Transport Secretary Grant Shapps came up with a plan alongside the independent chair of the Rail Review, Keith Williams. This plan, known uninventively as the Shapps-Williams Plan for Rail, was effectively to nationalise the railways under a new company called Great British Rail. And this appears to be one of the very few points of agreement between the previous and current government, as Labour have committed themselves to continue with the process of establishing Great British Railways, with it even being mentioned in the recent King's Speech. So in this video, we're going to have a look at how the passenger rail system currently operates in the UK, the issues with this, and how Labour plans to change it in the future. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. Now, to understand all of this, we need to go way back to 1996. Back then, the UK's passenger rail network was in the process of going from being nationalised under British Rail to the current rail franchising system. Now, basically, the government offered contracts to private companies for groups of rail routes. Now, some of these routes were profitable, e.g. popular commuter routes. Others, less so, like routes that connect smaller towns with few passengers to larger cities. The deal was that the successful franchisees would have to operate all routes within their franchise, so as not to deprive smaller towns of their vital rail connections. Now, this system has been in operation ever since, with each franchise being auctioned off to the highest bidder. Now, the issue has been that many of these franchisees have gone bust, meaning that the government has had to operate the franchise themselves. This is known as them becoming the operator of last resort. In fact, last year, for the first time since the rail franchise system was introduced, the biggest rail operator in the UK was actually the government, after it became the operator of last resort for TransPennine Express. That meant that the government was running 6 different rail franchises across the UK: London North Eastern Railway, South Eastern, Northern, Transport for Wales, ScotRail, and now TransPennine Express. To put it bluntly, it quickly became clear that the franchise system wasn't working. Franchisees were not meeting the terms of their contracts, and even the government themselves described the system as flawed. Essentially, this was because companies were forced to overpromise in order to get the franchise, but in the end they underdelivered and the state was forced to step in. And what made things even worse was the COVID pandemic, as the franchisees had to run the routes irrespective of passenger numbers, and with COVID regulations preventing people from being able to leave their homes, the franchising model effectively became unsustainable. As such, the government stepped in and simply ended the contract system, with them giving all operators the chance to transfer all revenue and cost risk to the government, with the franchisees being paid a small management fee in return for continuing to run the services. In essence, this was temporary nationalisation, although even at the time, it was understood that it could be the beginning of the end for the franchise system as a whole. With the Shapps-Williams Review on the horizon, it was understood that the franchise system as we knew it was unlikely to continue. And as it turned out, this was exactly the case, with the Shapps-Williams Review suggesting the biggest shake-up in how passenger rail operates in the UK since 1996. Specifically, they recommended the creation of Great British Railways, an organisation that would be operated by the government. The organisation would own the infrastructure, though would not own the actual trains themselves. They'd receive the fare revenue and run and plan the timetables for passenger rail. It's important to note too that Great British Railways would also take on the responsibility for other elements of the railways. Back in the late 1990s, the responsibility for railway tracks was given to a new private company known as Railtrack. A few years later, this was moved to another company known as Network Rail, who are still responsible for the railway tracks in the UK to this day. In order to simplify the chaotic network of responsibilities related to rail infrastructure in the UK, Great British Railways would take back control of all of the railway tracks. Now, this was the plan under the last Conservative government, but what does the current government want to do with it? Well, as we mentioned in the introduction, the Labour government are actually kind of in agreement with the Conservatives on this. They've committed to continuing the creation of Great British Railways, with it even being mentioned in the King's Speech. In order to do this, they plan to wait until the contracts for the franchisees expire naturally, at which point they'll be taken under government control and will eventually all be made part of the nationalised Great British Railways. Now, it's worth noting that the Labour government will still allow open access operators such as Hull Trains and Lumo to continue operating. These operators work independently from the franchises and run trains on only selected routes. Nor will Labour nationalise rail freight companies. So while Labour would pursue nationalisation, it would not be an absolute, complete nationalisation of all things trains. Aside from this though, there are some signs that Labour are planning on going further in some aspects. They've suggested that they'll try and cut waste and will claw back shareholder dividends, something that could save around £2.2 billion. Additionally, they'll create a new passenger standards authority, which will act as a watchdog for the new Great British Rail, as well as creating digital season tickets across the network and establishing a new automatic delay repay system. These changes likely won't be implemented until later, but do at least show signs that Labour has plans to further change the system beyond just simply the creation of the new Great British Railway. Anyway, this is what the government has planned to do, but what have they actually done so far? Well, they've only been in office for around 2 months, so to be frank, not all that much. They have introduced the new Passenger Railway Services Public Ownership Bill, which is a starting point for establishing Great British Railways, but it's not yet become law. Now, to be fair, Starmer has simply stated that his aim is to have Great British Rail operational by the end of the 5-year Parliament, so he does still have a fair while to go yet. Now, you can keep diving deeper into this and other news stories over on Nebula, where the TLDR team curates the most important news videos from around the world, saving you from a deluge of bad news and helping you pay attention to what really matters. This means no more feeling out of touch. On Nebula News, the TLDR team act as your guide through the media landscape, sharing the news that we're paying attention to and helping you to find the stories that matter and avoid burnout. Now, if you don't know already, Nebula is a streaming service that we co-own with a bunch of your favourite creators. There, you can watch original content like Real Life Law's incredible series War Room, which every month runs you through a whole load of ongoing conflicts, keeping you in the loop. You can also watch every TLDR video on Nebula ad-free, and in many instances, before they land on YouTube. If you're not a member already, then you can click the link in the description to sign up now. And if you do, you'll get 40% off an annual plan by using our link. Plus, Nebula will know that you came from us, which really helps us out. We've got some great feedback from existing members on the Nebula News features, so I hope you enjoy the effort that we're putting into Nebula News.